My name is Gareth Davis, and this is a discussion on what is critical thinking. And to help us understand that question, we have Heidi and Chris. Heidi, do you want to introduce yourself?
Hi, my name's Heidi Yendel. I'm one of the Academic Success Programme tutors, and I teach courses related to undergraduate essay writing and more recently critical thinking.
Yeah, so my name's Chris Sanders. I'm also an Academic Success Programme tutor, and I teach courses that are very similar to Heidi, so essay writing and critical thinking based courses.
Okay, good. So the first question we're going to try and answer is, what is critical thinking? Heidi, do you want to start?
Yeah, not sure it's a simple question to answer though, but I'll give it a whirl. So in a recent critical thinking course, I started by saying, what is critical thinking? And the definition that we had as a group was actually put forward by one of the students, and she said it's about being healthily sceptical about what you're reading. I think that's a really nice starting point. So it's about when you're researching, not being a passive reader of that material, but actively thinking and engaging with the text, so challenging it, questioning what assumptions it puts forward. So basically it's not taking the information that you're reading at face value and thinking critically about it.
So as a general definition, I think critical thinking is trying to determine what is correct or what is most truthful based on arguments that people put forward to you. And when I say arguments, I mean claims that people make, and these are claims that they support by evidence, or they try to support. So I think it's quite interesting what you said, Heidi, about having healthy skepticism, because if you're evaluating something to try and find out if it's correct or truthful, you might find that you can't come to a precise answer. So you have to go forward with what the best option is based on the evidence that you have to support that claim.
Yeah, finding some weaknesses that are there and finding some of the implications for some of the, maybe it might be out of date, or some of the points they're making might not be so relevant anymore. So just kind of questioning that material and picking some of the holes in it you might be able to find.
So can you think of a illustrative example of what critical thinking is?
Okay, so a general example in everyday life, as we're constantly using our critical thinking skills to make decisions, would be maybe deciding if a statement is true or false about people. So perhaps something you buy, or perhaps the way you do things. So we often hear statements about students. Students can be described as messy, loud, unruly. They don't look after their gardens outside their houses, that sort of thing. When actually, this might not be true. And in fact, it might just be a couple of really bad examples that are influencing our thoughts about these things. And because we've seen some particularly bad examples, we might believe that's the case for all students, when actually it might just be a couple of people doing that sort of thing.
It's a really good example about how a group of students who are in reality a minority have become the basis for a stereotype or assumption of what constitutes the behaviour of all students as a population, I guess. And then you think about the media amplifies that material a lot of the time and makes that seem like it's actually the truth. So people who don't know about students, people outside the university campus, will think all students are drunk. And it has that kind of impact of becoming the truth to some people as well.
Exactly, yeah. And this relates to biases that people often suffer from when you're making decisions. So if, for example, a very messy student house or students being unruly is more noteworthy and more newsworthy than students being nice
and working hard.
So those are the kind of things that you hear about all the time, and therefore you think that they're more common than they are.
Yeah, and it applies to not just to students. Think about nationalities. We can make claims about nationalities. We can say something like, all Italians like wine, or all British people are really polite. And you can make those kind of statements about those groups of people which tend to be assumed to be I think about this idea of a stereotype about what a criminal looks like as well. You can make these assumptions about the sex of the criminal. You make these assumptions and actually you can challenge those assumptions. It's not the case all the time or even half the time.
Yeah, of course. And once you've made these decisions, or once you think these things are true, you're going to look for stuff, or you're more likely to look for things that confirms these assumptions. So in order to get around these things, you have to use good logical and critical thinking.
Yeah.
So why is critical thinking important?
So we're constantly being subjected to claims or statements about things that we should or shouldn't do, or things that we should buy or shouldn't buy. And we have to use our critical thinking skills in order to make decisions about these things.
Yes, there could be claims about what you should wear, what you should eat, how you should exercise. Naturally, those are things which aren't universally true. They might be true in some of the time, but not all of the time. So it could be, we're told we have to eat 5 items of fruit and veg a day. That's a very nice idea. It's a very good idea. It'd be very healthy too. Then other countries have different numbers associated with that. So it could be to eat 10 a day in Australia. So it's different ideas of what is a good thing to do, what isn't a good thing to do. And they're all relative, and it's based on cultural norms instead, I guess.
Yeah.
So bearing in mind those differences.
Yeah. And I think it's important to learn to be a good critical thinker, be able to evaluate arguments, because actually I think often we're quite bad at it to start with, and we might not realise it.
We're taught to accept authoritative things as being the truth, aren't we? As children, we're told to accept authorities and believe authorities, when actually you need to get to a point where you can challenge them, accept what is correct, but also think there are other alternatives and there are other truths or multiple truths, and actually not one singular truth, which is quite a hard concept. And it's about being in university and thinking about those claims and subjecting them to a little bit more critical thinking in some way.
Yeah, because I think even things which you think are definitely true, when you start thinking more critically, you realise that nothing is based on certainty. So even things such as the idea of a country, it can be questioned. Is it a good idea to organise the world into countries? Because after all, it's not something that's set in stone, it's just an idea. But because it's been around for so long, and that's the way we've come to organise our societies, we think that we don't question it, and everybody becomes quite nationalistic, whether they realise it or not, from singing the national anthem in primary school.
Having a flag that you...
Yeah, having a flag, to supporting a rugby team.
An interesting point, Chris, about the countries being something which is not a universal truth. So the borders could change. We could redefine what constitutes that country's landscape. People move in and out of a country all of the time. So what actually constitutes British, American, French, Chinese is subject to change and is fluid, which is a great thing. But then it's in conflict and sometimes with the idea of a national identity, with the flags of the rugby team.
Yeah, so when you start questioning simple things like this, you realise that.
So there'd be different definitions of what British is. There'd be different definitions of what British is or what a nationality is, which all these things are quite easy questions. What is a British person?
Yeah.
That's actually a really hard question to answer when you think about it more deeply.
Yeah. So you can instantly see then how critical thinking applies, and it is actually really important.
Why is it important in an academic context?
I think it's important for students academically in terms of looking at your assignment criteria. And if you look at the assignment criteria, the higher the grade you want to get, so you're looking at the 60s, the 70s, it's looking for you to be engaging with the material, for you to be critically evaluating material, for you rather than just showing that you've done a good amount of reading, that you've read a lot of research on your topic, for you to be evaluating it, engaging with it, being more original with your interpretation of it. It's important academically in terms of being quite brutal and getting the highest grades that you have the potential to receive. And the critical thinking is an important skill there.
Yeah, so more generally, I think that critical thinking is key to academic processes, the purpose of universities and academic study, because you're trying to find out what is the best way forward and what is most truthful based on the research that you're doing. And so if you can do that, that's when you get the higher marks.
But you're basing that on the research that already exists. So you're doing your research, you're reading the information to date on the particular topic at hand, but you think the job of the student or the job of a first class or high 2-1 student is to think, okay, so what's missing from this material? Where can I go with this material? what's next.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, and you're ideally you come up with something original from looking at the different sources and deciding what's good about them and what's lacking from them, or why doesn't their argument that they put forward stand up.
And that could be because technology's changed, the times have changed, or just because you can see there's a broader argument to put forward there about something that material's missed out or has failed to notice so far. So your job is to think, what's in the 21st century, how can I look at this material now?
Okay, so to summarise then, in relation to academic work, a good way to look at the importance of critical thinking is that if you demonstrate you've thought critically about a subject and you've used that critical analysis in possibly a creative way at the end of it, you're going to get much, much better marks.
Yeah.
40s or 50s, you're looking at showing you've done a lot of research, demonstrating that you've read key texts. You're going in the 60s and 70s when you can say, I've read all this material, but this is what I have to say about it, this is what it's missing out, this is how I can be more critically thinking about this text.
And I guess higher then, you're putting forward a new argument based on the information that you found, and perhaps then even suggesting something that could be used maybe in government policy or some other application.
So you've thought critically, you've analysed the potential sources, you've chosen the good ones, you've synthesised them, and then you've created something new as a result of it.
Yeah, exactly, yeah. And that's what you're going to get the really high marks for.
Yeah, looking for solutions, considering the implications of the limitations you've noted.
How would you advise a student to approach their work to be successful?
I think one of the things I'd say is to approach the text in the mindset of kind of being a detective, really, asking questions about the text.
What kind of text?
So about could be the journal article or the chapter that you're currently reading or the material you're using for your research. So if you're approaching it as a detective, so asking questions about it. So it could be the who, what, where, when, why and how, and having these questions in mind. So if we just pick a few of those and discuss them a little bit. So the first one I said was who. So you've got a text, there'd be an author attached to that chapter or that journal article. So is that publication a peer-reviewed article? Is it a reputable publisher that's published that book or that edited collection? What else has the author written? Are they an authority in their subject? So those are things you can bear in mind first of all before you even read their actual content, about understanding whether that's a reputable source, whether there's potentially any bias there, so whether they've said something on this topic before which is worth bearing in mind. And the other one I said was what, so thinking about the what question. So what have they actually said? Have they given facts or opinions, and is everything that they've said substantiated with evidence? So have they backed up the points that they're making with statistical evidence or with some kind of source which backs up their points? I think the most crucial thing is what have they said, but also what have they not said, what have they left out? So have they tried to create quite a one-sided argument which misses something particularly important, which gives this kind of false impression about what the subject is in some way? I think the first thing I say to a student is have these questions in mind when you're reading. Don't read passively and be asking yourself these questions while you're reading.
Yeah, so I'd say that, have these questions in mind, and then a way you can use these questions is to try and think about everything you read in terms of being an argument. So when you go through a text, so it could be a journal article or it could be a book, you're looking to identify the conclusions that people have made. And then you're also looking to identify the reasons that people use to support these or to make these conclusions. So when you start looking at texts, you can identify arguments by looking for the conclusions and the reasons for those conclusions. And if you do this with those questions in mind, you can decide or you can determine whether these arguments are good arguments or bad arguments, whether you should agree with them or disagree with them, or whether you should use some of the information that they put forward in that argument to support your own conclusions.